Hi. I just want to talk a little bit more about, the week passed, the biggest, a lot of work was done, obviously, in committee. A lot of bills were passed, but the big news, I suppose, is the budget targets coming out and the framework for our budget going forward. And, just to reiterate, our plan, keeps the promises that we made to Minnesotans, and we believe it's a very good budget for middle-class Minnesotans. It does balance the $627 million budget deficit that we still face in a balanced way. It pays off the school shift. It makes new investments where we think it's going to build a prosperous future for the state of Minnesota, job creation, property tax relief, and more than anything else, $700 million in new investments in education, which is the pathway to prosperity for the state of Minnesota. The other thing that I think it's important to note is that, unlike in the 10 years I've been here before, this budget, with this budget and with the governor and the Senate's targets, although there are some differences that we'll need to work out, by and large, we are very much in the same place going forward into the budgeting, into the next stage of budgeting, in terms of our priorities and even in terms of, in general sense, the spending targets that we put together. And I think that that's a very hopeful and optimistic sign as we move into the next phase of our budgeting process, and really is a striking difference between the last decade, where the governor's proposals and the legislative proposals have been strikingly different. The other thing I think that it's important to note is the Republican response to our plan, which has been interesting. I don't know if folks saw it, but moments before the press conference last week, the Republicans sent out a YouTube video reminding us of all the times over the past year and most recent weeks that I've said that we were going to pay back the school shift in full. Apparently they didn't believe what we were saying for some reason, but we do appreciate that friendly reminder. What we'd appreciate even more, and I think the people of Minnesota would appreciate even more, is if they actually joined us in coming up with a solution for paying back the school shift and taking that seriously. All this session, the Republicans have repeated over and over again their agreement with us that this is something that needs to happen. But now we've presented a plan, and their only response to that plan is to say no without any other alternative. Well, I guess I should give Representative Doudt some credit. He did identify $10 million to go towards the $854 million school shift and the $627 million deficit. So he's made it a tiny way of the way there. But where's the rest of that $1.4 billion going to come? Is it going to come from new revenues? They've said no to that. Is it going to come from cuts? Well, apparently that is also a problem for the Republicans. In the Ways and Means hearing for the budget resolution, the very first complaint coming out of a Republican mouth was that we're cutting the Health and Human Services budget and that we shouldn't be cutting that budget. Representative Mary Franzen, yesterday in the paper, said we should actually be increasing the Health and Human Services budget. So basically what the Republicans are telling us is, although we face an $854 million school shift to pay off that they say they want to pay off, although we have a $627 million budget deficit that we need to fill, they're against any new revenue, they're against any new cuts, they're basically against everything. They are only in favor of the status quo, which I think Minnesotans have clearly rejected. And I think, I hope as they go home over the break and they talk to their constituents, they have very serious conversations about them, and their constituents have asked them tough questions about what's your plan and what's your solution, because it can't just be the status quo, or there's really no reason for them to be up here at the Capitol. The fact is, balancing our budget is going to be hard work. We have some really tough decisions ahead of us, but I'm very optimistic with where we're situated right now that we're going to come up with a great budget for middle-class Minnesotans, make investments in education first and foremost, which we think is the direction we need to go into the future. And I'm looking forward to a little bit of a break, but when we come back, we're going to be hitting it very hard, and I'll turn it over to Erin Murphy.
Thank you, and good morning. The Easter Passover break represents the halfway mark, if you will, for this legislative session. And as I've said before, I believe that our legislators have been working very hard, and we've had a very productive first half of the session. And I believe we're governing well for the people of Minnesota. The last action of this week is the signing of the health insurance exchange, which represents a very significant accomplishment for the legislature and a significant accomplishment for Minnesota. And if we had taken the Republican approach, instead of talking about that today, we would be talking about a federal exchange. And that doesn't comport with Minnesota's history, our values, or with our leadership on health care. And so I want to once more thank Joe Atkins and Senator Laurie for their work on this piece of legislation for the people of Minnesota. It's a long time in coming, 2 years of delay. But now, in these last 3 months, we've worked very hard for Minnesota and had seen that signed into law yesterday by Governor Dayton, which is great news. The budget framework that was released this week, I think, represents our members' vision, but more importantly, it represents the priorities of Minnesotans. And all last summer and fall, as we talked with Minnesotans, again, they talked about their priorities, their beliefs and values for the state of Minnesota, and their hope that we would work hard this session to put that into law, into action. And our members are heading home this week to continue their conversations with constituents to get necessary feedback so that they're ready to come back after the break and get to work on turning the budget framework that we've announced this week into a sturdy and progressive budget for the state of Minnesota for our future. So this is a place where people want to work and live and raise their family and live the life of their choosing. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Katie Sieben.
Thanks, Erin. Good morning. This week, the Senate set its budget targets as we continue to push ahead with the House and Governor Dayton on a balanced budget that will invest in Minnesota's future. Though we have slightly different budget targets or different frameworks, it's encouraging that our targets are relatively close and our plans share the same basic priorities. Those priorities are, as you know, new education investments, from funding all-day kindergarten to lowering costs for college students, property tax relief for homeowners across the state of Minnesota, and finally, long-term budget stability that will allow our state to grow out of deficits and help middle-class Minnesotans succeed and encourage businesses to expand and grow good-paying jobs. Looking ahead as we come back after the break, the finance divisions in the Senate will spend the weeks following the break, or we'll spend the weeks over the break listening to Minnesotans and working to refine our budget plans, and the tax committee will certainly return in April to work on the details of the tax plan. So, as I said, I think everything is progressing as we anticipated it could. We look forward to continuing to work closely with our friends in the House and Governor Dayton as we work towards a balanced budget that works well for all Minnesotans. With that, we're happy to take questions.
Mr. Speaker, do you anticipate the budget negotiation process being different? Are we still going to be standing outside the governor's office? You're going to be behind closed doors or with all DFL control? Could that process even be different?
Well, I think, again, because we're pretty close on our overall, values where we want to, make investments and our overall spending targets, I think it'll actually progress more smoothly. I imagine there will continue to be some, discussions where we need to work out details, but we hope to keep the process as public as possible, and there'll be conference committees and all that kind of good stuff.
But it still will happen behind closed doors, inevitably?
Some of the pieces, I suppose, yeah.
Can we expect the same-sex marriage vote in April, or is that more likely in May?
I think our focus in April is to be getting the budget bills off, and I think it'll take nearly to the, we're going to get out of Ways and Means or out of the Finance Committee in the Senate kind of the third week in April, and so I think it'll probably be April getting budget bills to conference committees.
What should people expect on the agenda the few weeks after you guys come off the break?
Budget, yes.
Do you think it's reasonable that, given the targets that came out from the Senate and the House and what the governor's proposed, should people assume there'll be a fourth-tier tax rate of roughly what the governor said, 2% on the top 2%? And what about cigarette tax as well?
So, I think we've been not hiding the fact that there's likely to be a top tier as part of the budget resolution. I think the details on that are going to be worked out at least in the House and the Tax Committee. Same is true on the cigarette tax, that'll be worked out in the Tax Committee. But, those are two things that are, clearly under serious public consideration and consideration here at the legislature.
Would you be willing to lower the top tier to a lower income?
Lower the top tier to...
Tier.
Oh, I think that, again, I think that that's going to be worked out in the Tax Committee. I guess that's what I would say about that. It depends on how they want to put their bill together. Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, what are you saying to the folks who are pushing for a gay marriage vote at this time, who say they wanted to vote this year? What are you telling them?
That we're working on the budget and they need to continue to build the conversation going forward.
Are you telling them that there will be a vote this year?
No.
So you're just basically saying...
We need to continue working on the conversation, and once we get the budget work done, those decisions will be made.
Is that a sign you don't think there are other votes in the House?
No, not necessarily.
Do you think there are other votes in the House?
I haven't totally counted them up. We're continuing to have the conversations with our members here, and I imagine that there's going to be a lot of conversations about that and the budget when people go home for the Easter break.
Will you head count on it? Would you bring it up without knowing it would pass?
Unlikely.
Same thing on guns.
I do believe that legislation for gun safety is going to pass this year, but I wouldn't dare to guess exactly what the contents of that bill is going to be at this point.
Is it true that you want an up or down vote on a full background check, universal background check?
I think it's more accurate to say that I expect that there will be that full vote on full background checks because there's people that are very interested in moving that issue forward.
Mr. Speaker, on guns, it seems like what the House is doing is saying you're going to let the will of the body shape this legislation. Are you whipping this? Are you trying to put any influence on how this legislation comes out, or is it going to be amendments decide at the end of the day most of this legislation?
Again, we don't have a caucus position on this legislation, and so it will be the debate on the House floor and the votes on the House floor that will decide the shape of the legislation. And then it goes to conference committee, of course, and the details between the two bodies will have to be worked out as well.
Did you step in to try to find a compromise that could pass out of committee last night the way you did on measures?
I worked with both sides to try to figure out a place where we could get a bill to move to the floor because I think it's important to have that debate.
Does this issue lose steam the more weeks go by from the Connecticut shooting tragedy? Did you sense the public is losing interest, or at least it's becoming more of a secondary thing?
Based on the coverage and the turnout at hearings, I don't think the public is losing interest in the issue. I guess I would say, seriously, I would say no, because while Connecticut was kind of a wake-up call because it was so dramatic and so tragic, just in the scope of the loss of life that happened there, this is something that continues to happen. Gun violence is something that continues to happen in kind of both large and small ways in communities across this state and across the country. Since over and over, even since Connecticut. So it's an issue that is going to continue to be on people's minds, and people are looking for workable solutions that can reduce gun violence. And I think a lot of the debate is going to be about what are those workable solutions.
Senator Hayden, will the Senate move on guns now? Last we heard they were kind of waiting for the House.
I know that it's in the Rules Committee, and I don't know if we were waiting on the House, but we wanted to continue to have that conversation. So I imagine when we come back from the break that Senator Latz will work with leadership and figure out how we move it from rules and figure out what that bill is going to look like on the Senate floor.
What do you think can pass the Senate?
I don't know. I haven't, as the Speaker said, we don't have a caucus position on it. We haven't whipped it. It's come up in caucus as a general discussion, but we haven't raised our hands to say who would vote for what part of the bill or not. And I think part of that is because the bill is still evolving, and so we don't know exactly what the package is coming out and then what people would do once they see what a gun safety bill would look like.
Well, universal background checks has no.
Well, I think it's in the bill today, but
yep.
I think we'll continue to work on it. There's a lot of folks that want that. I think I've been on record to say that that's something that I really think is a valuable tool. But once again, we haven't other than just the committee debate and the general discussion, we haven't said what would you or what would you not support, and part of that is because we don't know what the bill's going to look
Are
like.
you personally disappointed this hasn't moved along faster?
You know, I don't think so. I think that, you know, we got a little time yet in this session, and we want to make sure we do it right. And so I think it's been a good, healthy debate. I think that there is differences of opinion. I think that, you know, representing a district in South Minneapolis and Senator Champion, a district like North Minneapolis that has had, you know, a lot of gun violence in their districts, may have a different take on what guns are than someone who lives in greater Minnesota who thinks about guns in a much different way. So I think it's been a great opportunity for us to have the conversation with each other, share each other's experiences, and I think we've learned a lot from each other.
Senator, I'm sorry if this question's already been asked, but Vice President Biden is calling Democratic legislators around the country about gun safety and urging them to pass this bill. Have you talked with the Vice President? And I know Senator Bach has, but have you or any other Democratic leaders, anyone in the caucus, talked with him?
Yeah, I haven't talked to the Vice President. I'd be honored to talk to him, but I think we might be on the same side. So so I think that, you know, often you talk to the people who you want to encourage to look at this in a comprehensive way. And so
Senator Bach is against what's coming out.
Well, I think Senator Bach and I have I think Senator Bach is really concerned about gun safety. I think that Senator Bach is just concerned about how we do it. But once again, that's that conversation that Senator Bach and I have with each other all the time about, you know, what he thinks a good gun safety bill would do and how his perception of guns, you know, I think he's talked about it here, kind of what he thinks about guns and how, if they can become heirlooms and those kind of things. And I think about it in a much different way because I have personally had to deal with gun violence. I've had, you know, one of my very best friends was killed in 1995, and he was shot and killed with a gun. So my perspective on that is just a little bit differently because my worldview is just a little bit different. But that doesn't mean that we're not both absolutely 100% committed to gun safety. We just need to kind of share our experiences and figure out what can we do to make sure that Minnesota's safe.
Speaker Thissen, have you spoken with the Vice President or anyone else in your caucus that you know of?
No. Not me and no one in my caucus that I know.
Does that surprise you?
No. He's a busy guy.
Apparently he's not busy. He's not too busy to call legislators all around the country.
Yeah, no, he has not called me.
I had a question on marriage in the Senate for Senator Hayden or Senator Sieben. Can you give us a sense of the votes on the marriage issue at the moment? There was the adopting the committee report. Is it reasonable to assume that those votes are roughly what you would see in terms of the bill, or is it? What can you say about the support?
You know, I don't think so. I think that, you know, that was just a procedural issue, and we just wanted to make sure that we could adopt those. I wouldn't begin to say that's going to be a long debate, as it always is. And I think that once again, those stories and those personal frame of reference are going to come out. And so we don't have a caucus position on that, and we haven't whipped it. I think we know that it got out of the committee, and now it's sitting on the Senate floor, and we're going to get our business done, and we're going to take care of the budget. And at that point, we'll start making decisions about if this bill comes up. But I wouldn't take the adoption of the committee report as what the bill's going to, or what the vote would look like.
So you don't know how many votes for it at the moment?
No, I don't, because I haven't counted. I haven't asked members.
So just to be clear, you really haven't decided if you'll take it up this year?
I think we're in the same place as the Speaker said, that we are hyper-focused on this budget. We wanted to make sure we met the deadlines, and once we get done with kind of the business of making sure that we have a good, sound budget, then we'll start to talk about some of those issues, guns, marriage equality, et cetera.
Senator Cohen, is the Senate going to do a bonding bill this year?
You know, we would anticipate we're going to try to do something. I mean, there's, as you know, there have been hearings in the finance divisions on the various bonding requests. The governor's budgeted money for debt service, and so we would anticipate we'll be doing something. Obviously, in terms of the Senate process and procedure, we have the budget targets this week. We're getting our division chairs working on their budget bills, and Leroy has started preliminary work, but we're going to wait till after the break to actually start putting things together to see where we are in terms of the size of a bill or what's in it.
So you don't, I mean, the House, the Democrats are saying they want something around $800 million. Is that on par with what you were thinking?
That's probably in a ballpark. We have some money budgeted for debt service, but again, it remains to be seen as to how large a bill we'll have. The governor's budgeted, I think, debt service for $750. House apparently a little bit more than that, and I would guess we'd be somewhere in that ballpark.
When does that decision come on bonding in both chambers? Do you wait until after the budget? Is that kind of like guns and gay marriage?
Well, they won't be in the same bill if that's what you're referring to.
They'd be the same bill. But is the same timing?
More or less. I mean, we each have separate capital investment committees, and they'll be working on their own track. We will probably have, I would guess, in the Senate, we'll have the budget bills on the floor before we have a bill out of Leroy's committee. But obviously, as you guys know, once we start the budget bills getting metered out by in Senate Finance, and I would guess House Ways and Means, that things will go fairly quickly in terms of having the bills on the floor. But the bonding bill will be a little bit behind that.
View on revenue, since you're both in the same ballpark, as you say, but how you get there is somewhat different. Are there any quiet conversations between the two, the Senate and the House, on how you would get together in a grand deal at the end, or does that all have to wait for conference committee?
Well, we've had some conversations, but not at a substantive level. But I think, as the Speaker indicated, the House and the Senate are not aligned to the dollar, clearly. But if you look at the priorities of the Senate targets, clearly education, I mean, there's a bit of a difference in terms of the allocation of dollars with the targets. But we're certainly in the same ballpark, and if you combine the two education divisions, basically the same amount. And so I would expect that you're not going to see us in lockstep with each other. But as Paul indicated, I would guess, having done this for a while, that the resolution between bodies and with the governor will be a fairly straightforward process. I think Mary asked the question about how much would take place in public. I mean, we're going to have public conference committees. I can promise you that. We're not going to have conference committees that meet somewhere in a corner of the building. We'll have conference committees that are public. We'll do as absolutely much of the work in public as can be done. Obviously, there'll be some limited private conversations, but we're going to try to limit that to a minimum and make sure that the work is done in a very straightforward way. And again, I think if you look at, as the Speaker indicated, if you look at the budget priorities that we set out, and what's a little bit striking is we didn't have conversations about the targets. We went on our separate track. And the targets have some similarities. And I think it indicates that the priorities for both the House and the Senate are very similar. It's a combination of education as the top priority, property tax relief, and to a lesser extent, economic development, job creation.
Are House and Senate leaders planning to be out and about around the state next week making the case for the budget, or are you letting individual members do their own thing in their own districts?
I'll be in my office.
So, Representative Marquardt is going to be out around the state in several locations. Representative Murphy is going to be, well, you can talk about it. I should let you talk about it. Why don't you go ahead?
So they're both, I think. They will have individual members doing town halls. I'll be doing a town hall with Senator Cohen.
Invited.
Yeah, there you go. But, Representative Marquardt's going to be in Mankato and in St. Cloud and Albert Lee. I'm going to be in Wilmer and Granite Falls and Albert Lee as well. And then with members in a variety of places, we're going to do we're going to do an all-day K event on Monday. So stay tuned for that. We think that's the centerpiece of our education budget. But members are going to be very busy, I think, talking with their constituents, listening to them, and talking about our budget framework and the work ahead for the rest of the session.
I hope to be at Regent's Hospital.
There we go.
It's 9 days.